Welcome to this week's episode of Saulcast, where we'll be talking about Season 4, Episode 5, Quite a Ride. This is going to be our instant take, so we just watched the episode, and we'll spend 20-30 minutes giving you our immediate reactions. Check back later this week for our full recap and analysis. I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
Let's get into it.
Now, if that wasn't the greatest cold open on Better Call Saul, then this isn't the greatest Better Call Saul podcast.
It was your heart just beating so hard in your chest about 4 seconds into that.
My mind was going crazy. So first, I'm like, I see all this shredding. It looks like a place that's dilapidated. Maybe this is Chuck's house and Jimmy had to come by and take care of a bunch of documents. Then I'm like, wait a minute. I recognize that pillar. What's that pillar doing there? And I'd been recently rewatching some Breaking Bad episodes, so I was like, did I play the wrong show? Maybe I'm playing Breaking Bad now.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw We the People, I recognized it as Saul's office. And then I literally pushed on my screen to bring up the interface and double check if I was accidentally watching a Breaking Bad episode. And then as soon as I realized this was actually Better Call Saul, I was like, oh my God. The alarm bells were just going off in my head.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah. Why do you think they started with that?
I don't know. It seems so out of nowhere.
It's sort of, I think it did a few things. First, it told us this is a big episode. This is important. And throughout the episode, I saw some things that made me feel like they just put a little bit more into this episode. It's like the third to last Breaking Bad episode, Ozymandias. They brought in Rian Johnson, a huge director, to come in and direct that episode, and it shows. You watch that episode, and it feels like film, like art. That was similar in this episode. It was so well put together.
Yeah, I'm calling it right now. This was the best episode of the season so far.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, and this has been a great season.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that opening just set off just a great episode from start to finish. And there's so much I loved about that first scene because it just picks up right where Breaking Bad left off, which is not something any of us thought would happen on this show. I feel like everyone thought that this show would be pre and post Breaking Bad. I don't think anyone expected there to be mid Breaking Bad or any crossover.
I thought that it was coming at some point, but I definitely didn't expect it to just happen all of a sudden. I thought we'd slowly creep into the Breaking Bad timeline, and suddenly you'd realize you're in the middle of it. But this was just like time jump, boom, you were right in the middle of it.
Yeah. I love, even during this frantic scene where he needs everything shredded and he's working with his, assistant, he still kind of has a sense of humor, even though anyone could be coming to kill him or arrest him at that moment. He's cutting through a hole in the wall. He punches through the Constitution to get this box, which I think is the same box that when he's Gene, he opens it up and he gets his old tapes and everything.
Oh, that might be. That would be worth checking out.
Yeah. So I think it is, in which case that's even funnier because it's like he was just getting some VHSs. There's probably other important things in there. But
did he have on... He had, I think he had body armor on, or like a bulletproof vest on underneath his shirt. Did you notice he looked a little bit bulkier? And I remember towards the end of Breaking Bad, he runs into Walt, and Walt's like, "Are you wearing a bulletproof vest?" He's like, "I gotta be careful, man. The shit's going down."
Yeah, this brought me right back there. That frantic, I've never felt so much tension in any show as those last couple of episodes of Breaking Bad, and this brought me right back.
Yeah.
And it was just so much fun seeing Saul. We haven't seen Saul in a long time. And
Yeah. And I think that one of the other things that this scene told us that it's an important episode, and I think it also just sort of served as a reminder that all of the choices you're seeing Jimmy make in this episode and the surrounding ones, these are taking him to becoming Saul. And I think people may have watched this show waiting for that one event that turns Jimmy into Saul Goodman. Kind of like with Walt, you have the cancer diagnosis. That's what turned him into Heisenberg or sent him shooting in that direction. For Jimmy, it's a little bit different. He's always had elements of Saul there, and it's not really turning from one person into another. This is who he is, and I think that this opening is just reminding us that he's heading down that path, and it's telling us to pay attention to the choices he's making right now.
Right. Saying this is what eventually he becomes. Keep that in mind. And that's a similar thing to what they're doing with Gene, those Gene scenes.
Man, I feel like I could just talk about the opening for the next 2 hours.
Yeah. This is now just the Saulcast opening podcast. We'll have a separate one covering the rest of the episode.
Right.
But yeah, and so then he tells the assistant, he's taking tons of rolls of cash, and you can tell the assistant's kind of eyeing that. He tells her to be prepared for a phone call at a specific time. He also gives her a card and says to call them and tell them Jimmy sent you. And we don't know who it is that she's supposed to call. And the last kind of middle finger that she gives him is not only is she just demanding basically extorting him for a couple extra rolls of cash, which are probably many thousands of dollars for her, but you could tell he's trying to say goodbye and he's awkward and doesn't know what to do, and he tries to go for a hug.
Right.
And she's just like, okay, and she just leaves. She has to go throw away these bags of shredded paper 5 miles away in different dumpsters.
Yeah.
And then he orders his replacement vacuum filter, which I love the vacuum guy, so I just liked seeing that.
Yeah, I really hope we get to see him at some point this series.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite minor characters.
Yeah, which is, by the way, there's so many... They're so good at spinning up these characters. Either of the two architects that showed up to potentially build Guss's super lab, I would watch a spinoff about either one of them.
Yeah, they were both such funny guys, and it's like they're both very different, but they're almost exactly what you'd expect from someone who is willing to clandestinely build an underground lair. One is this like French guy with a mustache who at first he seems kind of meek, but then he turns out to be kind of a braggart. He doesn't have the most discretion because he's bragging about prior things that he's done, and he's giving a really quick timeline for what he can do with this lab, which I think all of those...
Potentially overpromising.
Overpromising, probably. And so I think all of that adds up to the reason that Guss just flat out rejected him.
Right.
But he was hilarious.
Yeah, they were both a little bit eccentric. They both spoke with total authority. I would believe whatever they told me, except for the first guy by the end, I guess. They both seemed really smart, a little bit eccentric, and just hilarious overall.
Yeah. And that second guy, the German one, who he looked like hell, and he kept looking like he was going to throw up. Meanwhile, you just have Mike in the car. Mike had to make this trip twice.
Yeah.
And you see Mike in the car just bobbing up and down, like with his like poor posture and his head kind of sunken down into his neck, and he's just comfortable and sleepy, it looks like. Then this German guy's flailing all over the place, like about to vomit the entire time.
I'm going to throw up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Yeah, so that was hilarious. Definitely respect for the German one who Guss ends up choosing. Guss introduces himself by his full name and even speaks German to him.
Yeah, this guy, he just knows everything. He knows medicine for some reason. He can speak German.
He knows everything.
I guess those are the two. Those are if you know medicine and you can speak German, you're like in the top. You're like in the top tier of smart people.
Gus definitely respects this guy because this guy is super detail-oriented, and basically all he expresses the entire time are doubts about the project, which shows that he understands how serious it is and how many things could go wrong, and that's what Gus likes. It's the detail orientation.
I also noticed that he spoke not in hypotheticals of, oh, I would have to do this, I would have to set these beams up. He spoke as if it was a certainty that he was going to be the one in charge of the building. He said, oh, I'm going to have to knock this out, and then we're going to have to do this. He spoke with some confidence and certainty,
right,
but still expressed all that doubt, so he had the proper level of humility, I think.
Right. He didn't speak about it. He didn't bring up those doubts to say that it can't be done. He brought it up to say, don't expect it to happen quickly, and don't expect it to be cheap.
Right. The opposite of the first guy.
Exactly. And so that's, I think, what Gus liked about the second guy, and I look forward to seeing more of him because he was funny.
Yeah.
We also, I loved when Jimmy puts on that tracksuit when he goes to start slinging those phones around on the street. At first, I was like, there's no way people are going to buy that costume. Like, it looked he looked like such a goon, but, it obviously worked right away.
When the motorcycles all showed up behind him, what was your first thought? Because for me, I thought that for some reason he had overstepped his bounds and they were coming to teach him a lesson or something. So
I had two thoughts at the same time. So the first thought was, well, everyone's afraid of these guys, so I think it's just like that when they go to the bar, or I mean, really, it's a hot dog place. When they go to Weenie Hut Jr., everyone else it's their turn to leave. So I thought maybe that's all it was. But then part of me thought, well, you know what? Maybe Jimmy doesn't realize that there is like a phone industry here, a phone black market, and maybe they got wind of what he was doing and he's on their turf.
I hear you've been selling phones on our turf.
Yeah. So I didn't entertain that thought for long, but it flashed across my mind.
Once the music kicked in, the sort of low grumbling intensity started, I realized that it was a lot more interesting than people coming to teach Jimmy a lesson. You realize that the suspense there is Jimmy deciding whether or not he's going to go and try and sell to them. And when he decides to go, up until this point, you didn't actually get to hear him pitch those phones to anybody outside of his store. And you're so curious, what is he saying that's getting people to buy these phones? And then you get to see him pitch it to the gangsters. And it was magic. It was great to watch. Yeah,
he's so good at it. And it's amazing because he only had 4 phones left. He risked his life there to sell these 4 phones to these gangsters because for him it's an achievement. It's a personal challenge.
He looks alive for the first time in so long.
Yeah.
I mean, the montage sells it to you. Just watching him go around and sell these phones, you can tell he is enjoying himself so much.
He's in his element.
Yeah, and then those damn kids had to come and screw it all up. It's so annoying.
I know. He needs to get to them at some point this season.
Maybe he can hire those 2 kids that rode skateboards around way back in season 1.
Yeah.
The ones who he had to talk Chuco into not cutting their legs off.
Yeah.
Maybe he can call in a favor, have them find those other kids.
Yeah. I'd like to see Jimmy just... You know what? Jimmy should get in touch with Huel. Let him teach him a lesson.
Yeah, you know what? Turn this into the Avengers of Better Call Saul side characters. You get Huel, skateboard kids, his old film crew. Just bring them all together and then find those punk kids.
Maybe that like nerdy guy who was stealing pharmaceuticals.
Hey kids, you better give that money back. Do the right thing. I don't remember if that's what he sounded like, but in my head, it's about right.
I think he did. Yeah, I like this. This is a good spin-off. I think that's what's going to come next.
So before we leave the scene of Jimmy selling his phones, there's one thing that stood out to me here, which I was noticing throughout the episode. And I think I was primed to notice it because, as I said at the start, showing the cold open of Saul Goodman told me that this is an important episode, and they're going to put more into this episode than they do the average one. And so I kept noticing how much attention they paid to the cinematography. A few examples. You've got Jimmy alone on the couch walking Dr. Zhivago, and how it kept cutting to different angles. Probably the most noticeable use of interesting cinematography was the point of view shots when the first potential architect had the bag over his head. He starts, you have a couple shots where the camera's under the bag and you can sort of hear Mike's voice next to you.
That was great because whenever someone has to wear a bag over their head in like a TV show or a movie, in my head, I'm always thinking, like, if that were me, I'd be looking down and try to memorize all the shoes of the people around me and, like, try to really focus on the ground and see if I could learn something about where I am.
Right, and it's exactly what the mustache guy does and it wasn't just putting the camera underneath the bag. It's sort of an obvious take, but even before they did that, you have a shot where the camera is right in front of the man with the bag over his head, and as he starts walking forward, the camera kind of moves with him for a few seconds. So they did some interesting things with the camera there besides just putting it under the bag. The other place where the cinematography was noticeable to me was, first off, of course, the whole montage of Jimmy selling the phones and all the interesting cuts they did there. But the way that it was shot, where Jimmy in his tracksuit standing next to his car and all of the motorcycles showing up.
Yeah.
All the lights coming on and then turning off, and just the intensity combined with the music that builds up. Oh my God! And then this whole episode is so artistically done.
Yeah, that was amazing, and that was the cinematography at its best, and they always do a good job with that. But this was particularly impressive. And I love the way they diffuse all of that tension with the bikers at the end, where Jimmy is practically like a little kid, just kind of waving bye to them while he's munching on a hot dog.
Yeah, he is feeling good about himself at that point.
Yeah. Now, Jimmy's going to court, which is a place that we've been seeing a little bit more of lately anyway because of Kim, which I find interesting because it felt like during season 1 we spent so much time there, and otherwise for this last season or two we've seen so little of it. So it was interesting and felt almost like going home to see him there. Then we saw something that I did not expect to see, which was Howard in the bathroom looking like absolute garbage. I thought he was drunk at first.
Yeah, we sort of forgot about Howard, right? We haven't seen him in a couple of episodes. But when we last saw him, he wasn't... He was doing okay, but he was left in a place where he could easily fall apart.
Yeah.
He confessed that he thinks he was the cause of Chuck's suicide. And then Kim yells at him for trying to do what he thought was right. And so, you sort of brush it aside, and then you come back a few episodes later. Of course he's falling apart, but way worse than you would have expected.
Yeah, and I love just the first thing, really, that he says to Saul, or that he says to Jimmy, is, "You ever have insomnia?"
And then Jimmy, I gotta ask, Howard, what's eating you?
Yeah, and Howard, appropriately so, says, Jimmy, I think I've shared enough, more than enough, which he did, and he opened up to Jimmy, and Jimmy just shat on him.
Yeah, and I'm laughing right now, but not it was sort of funny, but I'm also just laughing at how horrible it is.
Yeah,
the way that Jimmy's treating him, not to be mean, but just because he's actually oblivious and isn't drawing the connection between Chuck's death and Howard falling apart in front of him.
I mean, it's borderline sociopathic.
Yeah, I mean it.
And I love Jimmy. I love him as a character, and this is not necessarily a criticism, but it's like that was almost non-human.
Yeah, it feels like there are some chickens that have to come home to roost at some point for Jimmy.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine we've truly seen him deal with Chuck for the last time. I think it's got to come back at some point.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck was such a huge part of his life and who he is, how he came to be, and he's been such an important character for the last 3 seasons. I can't see this just fading away.
No. Oh, and we've got to talk about the shrink, because I have to imagine we both want to see Jimmy talk to the therapist, but I feel like you in particular have sort of been rooting for that. So this episode, I got to think you were on the edge of your seat thinking there's a chance. They brought it up a few times. It was in the previously on. They showed a quick clip of Kim telling him to go see the shrink, and I thought it might happen.
And when I saw that previously on thing, I was like, yes! And lo and behold.
And then literally the episode ends with him tearing apart the phone number and throwing it away.
I did think it was hilarious that he was suggesting Howard see the therapist.
Yeah. Which he has nothing to gain from that. That was purely just a goodwill. Jimmy's trying to help out Howard. Maybe. I'm reaching a little bit, I guess.
I think it could be a way for Jimmy to feel superior to Howard and be like, oh, I don't need a therapist, but this guy definitely does.
Yeah, it's probably a more accurate read, even if it's less charitable.
Yeah, I know I'm not being... I guess I'm being kind of hard on Jimmy this episode, but I don't mean it that way. Like, he's an awesome character, but I think as we would all agree, his moral conscience has slipped a little bit.
Ooh, you all catch that, listeners? It's like a little slipping Jimmy pun right there.
Yeah. And speaking of cinematography, as you were discussing before, we also see a great shot of Jimmy at the court in this big nest of cubicles. This is right after he throws away the psychologist's phone number. This is the guy he has to talk to keep him updated on what he's been up to for the time that his license has been suspended to practice law. And it ends on a very interesting note, and one where we've never seen Jimmy this determined.
Right. The officer asks him, do you have any plans for 9 months from now when this temporary suspension is over? And
at first he just goes, I have some plans.
Yeah, okay. Care to elaborate? Or plans such as...
Then we see Jimmy serious, and he says, in 9 months, 24 days from now, he's counting, and he starts talking, I'm going to have a new office. It's going to be bigger and better. And he implies that it's going to be with Kim, his partner, which he hasn't been paying attention.
Yeah, he has not been watching this show.
No. So he needs to sit down and have a little chat with Kim, I think, at some point. But he says, everything will be better. I'm going to have more clients. I'm going to win more cases. And I'm going to be a damn good lawyer.
That scene is going to go down as one of the important, memorable scenes from the series. That's the ones who, I am the one who knocks. It's that level of importance. Yeah. Especially the placement of it, because you open up with, just as a reminder, here's where this all ends up, by the way. His whole practice is going to fall apart. Things don't end well. And then you end the episode with him speaking so highly of where things are going and his big plans. So it's just creating that irony and that comparison between expectations and the reality that we know is coming.
And what's interesting is... for the time that he's Saul Goodman, we only know him through the context of his work with Jesse and Walt. We don't actually know, he's had hundreds and if not thousands of clients as Saul Goodman at that point, and continues to have other clients too, all the time. We don't know what that experience was like for him, but we get a sense that those were his glory years. Even when he's Gene, he looks back longingly at that time, in those old VHS tapes. So even after what we see at the beginning of this episode, where he's frantically shredding everything and he has to escape and get a new identity, it doesn't look like he has regrets about his Saul Goodman years. I think he has regrets that it ended.
It makes you wonder if maybe this series will dip pretty heavily into the time during Breaking Bad, because it seems like there's a lot we didn't see with Saul off camera. Makes you wonder if we're going to see more of that than, you would have expected.
Yeah, because, Saul had a lot of parts. He got a lot of screen time in Breaking Bad, but ultimately, I think his main role was as this kind of wise counsel figure and comedic relief.
Yeah, the funny thing is, what you just said, that Saul had a lot of screen time in Breaking Bad, a long time ago when Better Call Saul first started, I was listening to, I think it was the Better Call Saul Insider podcast or some interviews where they talked about some of the prep.
Hey, those are our competitors, bro.
Hey, right, let's bleep that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to beep, and they were saying that in preparation for writing Better Call Saul, they had somebody go back to Breaking Bad and pull out every single clip that had Saul Goodman in it, and they spliced it all together. And I remember being shocked at the running time of all those clips. I think it was under 2 hours.
Wow.
Of actual screen time for Saul Goodman. So it just goes to tell you, we did not see a whole lot of Saul's life.
Yeah, and his character was so larger than life and had such an impact at every scene that he was in. Because it left you with like a Saul aftertaste, which sounds kind of weird now that I say it, but
that should be the name of our podcast instead of Saulcast. Saul's aftertaste.
Oh God. Yeah, what does it taste like?
Oh, all right. Let's move on.
Well, my point is just that even despite how little screen time he had in total, he had a big impact when he was on screen because he was just such a larger than life character, and especially in contrast to such a dark show, you remember the funny times, and that's what he brought to the table. And yet, there's so much more depth to his life and character during those years that we knew nothing about. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we do see more Saul during those Breaking Bad years.
Yeah, absolutely. And this all makes me want to go back and rewatch Saul in Breaking Bad. Even though I know that when they wrote him originally in Breaking Bad, I'm sure they didn't have all of this backstory in mind, but you know that when they're writing this backstory, they're watching Breaking Bad and they know where he was. So I'm just curious to see what light would you view it in now, knowing all of this. Yeah, it would be really interesting to do.
Yeah, and this show adds so much more rewatch value to Breaking Bad. When Better Call Saul is over and they release the Breaking Bad Better Call Saul Blu-ray box set, they're gonna break records.
Oh yeah, and speaking of which, I will not be ready to leave this world behind when Better Call Saul is done. Just the introduction of the two architects in this show just reminded me of the great world building they do. You've got Ed, the vacuum cleaner, disappearer guy. You've got these two architects. You've got the vet. You have all these interesting characters that surround the main characters. I have a feeling that once Better Call Saul is over, Vince Gilligan will not permanently leave this world, this Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul universe. I think that there's always more stories to tell just in that universe.
Yeah, I think that's possible. There was a time when Saul was the same tier or level of character that the vet was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it might be too soon to talk about, but to think about the show ending. But I don't know, today's episode felt to me like one that could have aired 2 or 3 episodes behind a series finale.
Yeah.
It made me think that we might be getting pretty close to an end game. I'm expecting any day for them to announce, all right, next season, it's going to be the last season.
Yeah.
And then because it's AMC, they'll probably say, well, it's going to be the last season, but we're going to split it into 2, so we can have more DVD sales,
right.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and I suspect that's what will happen. It would make sense that it follows the same structure that Breaking Bad did.
Yeah, and you know what? I want them to drag it out as long as possible because, like I said, I am not ready to let go of Better Call Saul.
You said it.
I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
And this is Saulcast. Instant Take.
We can't get enough podcasts, and I know you can't either. So if you look out on our Twitter at SaulcastPod, you'll see a very special announcement later this week about a new podcast we're starting. You may have seen some commercials for it during tonight's episode of Better Call Saul for this TV show called Jack Ryan, which has just premiered on Amazon this week. We're going to be releasing a podcast just like this about Jack Ryan, and if you have any interest in that show, we think you'll love our companion podcast. So remember to check out at SaulcastPod for a link to that in just a couple of days. Finally, we would love it if you could subscribe to this podcast in your podcast app. It's convenient for you because you'll get the podcast automatically whenever we release it, and it will help us grow and show up higher in the search results. And the best thing that you could do is in your podcast app, especially Apple Podcasts, just click on the review section and give us, your rating for the show. And if you have time, you can also write a little review. It makes a huge difference for us, and we really appreciate the feedback.
If you leave a rating, I'll give you $1.
You could leave any rating. It doesn't even have to be a 5. For every star you give us, Gil will give you $1.
Yeah, leave any rating you want, but there's going to be a random,
You don't even have to leave a rating. Just talk to us.
I'll give you $1. I really could use a friend right now, and all of you could be my friend. Just leave me a rating.
How about this? Everyone is giving Gil 5-star ratings. Have you... Just mention the word Uber around him, and he'll pull out his phone, and the first thing he does is shows you his star rating. I think he's got like a 4.98.
No, not anymore. It's down to like a 4.72.
Oh no, why? What did you do?
I think I fell asleep in the back of the Uber a few weeks ago.
Well, you know what? You know what Gil's never done? He's never fallen asleep during this podcast, and I think that deserves a 5-star rating. Don't you?
This is my favorite show ever. If it was anime, it would easily be my favorite show.